Hello and welcome back to another video. And today we're going to talk about, as promised, my reading program, my daily reading program. And just a word of caution before I start here. I noticed that there's a lot of videos on the internet giving you some unsolicited advice. And before I start here, I just want to say that this video is here strictly for entertainment and reference purposes. I'm not giving you like a one-size-fits-all solution for how you should approach your reading, because we're all very different people. We all read for different purposes, and we have different aims and ambitions with regards to our readings. And I don't want to be that person who gives you like, this is it. And I'm not really in the space to kind of argue with people with regards to, what's the best reading strategy out there. So whatever works for you should work for you. I'm simply here to sort of chip in to tell you guys what has worked for me. So I want to start this video with a kind of entry point, which is my recent burnout with reading. So the last video was really a consequence of me feeling so burnt out from how I used to approach reading, which is I see a book that I really like, I completely fall in love with it, I read that book in a kind of frenzy, in a sort of like in an intellectual frenzy, and I drop the book and I get so burnt out that I would never ever pick up another book for another 2 months or 3 months. So that's how I used to approach reading. And, these periods of frenzy or these sort of sudden inspiration, these pretty rare moments, maybe twice a year you'll hit upon one of these moments. And maybe, what's more likely going to happen is going to be the case where you get a book, you think about the book, you're like, oh, this is a pretty good book. And then if you still use that logic of I'm going to ride out this wave, or I'm going to ride out this kind of intellectual frenzy, you're going to find out that you will actually start a lot of books, and then 20 pages later or 50 pages later, you're going to find yourself quitting a lot of books. And that's one of the things that I found to be rather frustrating. There's just like a whole shelf of books. Even over here on this desk, there's like a whole lot of books that I still haven't finished. Because I was under the impression that if I have enough curiosity and energy, I can finish this book in a burst of passion. And but if I really do the maths, sometimes if I just read 15 to 20 pages every single day, compounded over time, maybe over the course of a month, 2 months, if I time 30 days times 15 pages, that is a lot of reading. If I can stay consistent. And if I just stick with my reading goals, if I can just stick with the program, before I know it, all of these books will have a red marker on them, all of them. And I think what I'm trying to say here is that the actuality of reading is very mundane. And I feel like as a part of our media culture, we've learned to chase the dopamine of starting new things. We've learned to chase that excitement of, oh my God, I'm starting a new book. Oh my God, this thing really captured my attention. So over time, we start to neglect the daily habits that go into it. And I think recently I just found that I started to see this kind of impotence that I have in the amount of stuff that I've read, especially after my degree. A lot of people have this illusion of like, after you finish an English degree, you don't need to read anything else. That degree, you've read everything in your degree. But most graduates from English literature can probably relate to this. There's nothing like an English degree that'll make you feel like you're the dumbest person on planet Earth. You're going to feel like, I have a pretty good grasp of a general overview of what I should read and how literature functions as text and how the kind of relationship between reader and text. But if you really want to develop a kind of deep and in-depth understanding, a college degree in literature is only the beginning. This is your entry point for you to then truly start to build up your own repertoire of reading. And once that point sort of made a lot of sense to me, on the one hand, it's very reassuring. I have the next 20 to 30 years to read everything that I want to read, because now I have the tools to read anything I want to read. So difficulty is no longer a problem. But now we actually need to get down to the process of reading. So to counteract that, 2 problems. One, my reading habit is not very consistent. That's one of the problems. And the second problem is there's just so much under the sun that I still need to read. Despite having an English degree, that doesn't exempt me from not reading anything anymore. So with these 2 problems in mind, here's how I structure my reading. So every morning when I wake up, I would set a timer for 15 minutes, and over my morning coffee, I would focus on a really difficult piece of reading. Something that's really hard that I wouldn't read on a train, that I wouldn't read at a cafe, that I wouldn't really read in a public space. And currently, I'm doing this crazy program of digging through all the canonical texts. So I'm starting from the very beginning, the Iliad, Homer's Iliad. Some could argue that I should go even, further back to some older texts, but the Iliad is my point of departure. So I'm currently reading that, maybe 5 to 10 pages a day in a span of 15 minutes, but that is just like pure concentration. If I can knock out like 10 pages with that full degree of concentration, then that's my daily reading goal done. 15 minutes, 5 to 10 pages, and that's done. And then a lot of you guys are probably thinking, that's not a lot of reading. That is really not a lot of like engagement without such a massive brick of a book. It's around 600 pages to Iliad. But then over time, I started to notice that the repetition of getting on or making that coffee and setting up my book and setting up the note-taking stuff that I need to read the book, just a pure repetition of doing that every single day. It doesn't matter how long you do it for, and it doesn't matter how many pages you read, but just a pure repetition of doing the act already improves the likelihood that you're going to stick with this in the long term. So I lose track of time. I think it's about a month since I've started this habit, and I fell off the wagon a few times, and it's just a process of adjusting my strategy, kind of adjusting the time when I start the thing. But I would say to you, if you want to adopt a similar strategy, that you probably want to purposefully underread, so you can ensure that you get the repetition in instead of just subscribing to some fantastical notion of reading 40 pages a day and completely burn yourself out 2 weeks later, or even a week later, or even a few days later. So that's what I do first thing in the morning over my morning coffee, because I love making coffee. I have a coffee machine in the kitchen, so making coffee is kind of like my morning meditation. So as a part of this morning meditation, I throw in 15 minutes of reading something really difficult, something deliberately mind-expanding. And if you want some further inspiration, I took a lot of inspiration from Ted Gioia. And if I'm butchering that last name, I'm sincerely sorry. I'm a big fan of Ted's work. Check out this interview on the podcast How I Write. I forget who runs the podcast, but don't come after me if you find out the guy's name. But that podcast episode single-handedly inspired me to really dive into literature of the past, because my sort of focus throughout my honors year and throughout my undergrad and my graduate years had always been modernist literature. So I was really into Joyce, I was really into Ezra Pound, and I was really into Virginia Woolf. So that's sort of like my narrow focus concentration period. But that interview really inspired me to go all the way back and to read all the stuff that I should have read before I started this entire journey of educating myself. So that's a major source of inspiration. So check that interview out if you want an extra kick in your ass. And the other component of my reading program is that every night after I do my evening routine of sort of like, I have this like financial spreadsheet, how I track my finances, but that's a whole other talk show in itself. And I would add another habit. This is called habit stacking. And if you haven't read Atomic Habits, I recently listened to the book at the gym, which I'll talk about in a minute after I describe the nighttime reading routine. So I tend to stack this habit of tracking my finances. I tend to stack this reading habit on top of it. So this is called habit stacking. So it makes that second habit a little bit easier. So what I would do is that after I track my finances, I would hop into bed and I would read something lighter. And by lighter, I mean anything I want to read. So there's this book that I'm currently reading by the wonderful Helen DeCruz, Professor Helen DeCruz. She actually sent me this advanced copy. If I can go fetch it. This advanced copy of Wonderstruck. It's no longer advanced because it's already out. You can get it. I highly recommend it. I just finished Jonathan Haidt's The Righteous Mind. It's a bit of a slower read, but now I'm really excited to get into this one as a part of my bedtime reading routine. So before I go to bed, I simply read something that I enjoy to make sure that I don't associate drudgery with reading. So that typically goes on for 10 to 15, or sometimes it extends into 30 minutes because I tend to get lost in books. And every night before I go to bed, that's my wind down routine. I read something inconsequential and something I like to read. And that forms the two-part reading routine. Two-part, one part in the morning where I would read something deliberately mind-expanding, and one thing before I go to bed, something that both entertains me and informs me. So that's been working out really well. And I think I've adopted this routine for the past, close to a month. Like I said, I've fallen off the wagon plenty of times. So it's just about getting that consistency back. And some days are absolutely horrible. Some days I end up reading 5 to 7 pages combined. But in my mind, it doesn't really matter. As long as I get that repetition in, that's all that matters for me. So like I mentioned before, I also tend to listen to a lot of books at the gym whenever I go out to work out, or whenever I'm on a walk, whenever I'm just there's this hour-long train ride that I have to take to my university. So during this train ride, I would put on a podcast or an audiobook. So that's another source of how I digest information. So I'm going to leave that for another video on my views on audiobook consumption, because I think audiobooks, there's a very specific type of book that you can really listen to via audiobook, because as soon as an audiobook crosses a certain level of threshold or information density threshold, you tend to not retain anything from the audiobook. It's just like passing noise to you, right? So I think I'm going to dedicate an entire video to audiobooks in the future, probably in the next video. But nevertheless, that's my brief reading program. So it started off with a concern. I really want to be more well-read. And I think that my literature degree was only the beginning of me starting this entire process of being more well-read. So that inspired me to go back to the beginning. And I set up these structures in my life to ensure that I get these things in on time. So I start off with something very mind-expanding, and I finish it off with something relaxing at the end of the day. So for you, if you want to take anything away from this video, if you want to build your own process or build your own system for getting books read, if you want to build your own reading program on a daily basis, first of all, define why. Why is it the case that you want to read? This entire video, the first part of this video is merely me explaining to you why I read the way I do. So hopefully that would inspire you to start defining your own why. Do you want to read more romance novels? Do you want to read more consistently on a subject matter that you're really interested in? Are you a history buff? Are you interested in, geometry? Are you interested in mathematics? Is there a field that you want to get into, but for whatever reason, you just don't find a motivation to get into it, and you don't find the time to do it? So define something that you think that you don't have the time for. And second of all, divide it up to ridiculously small chunks. And realize that it's the repetition that really matters. It's the consistency that really matters. It's not about how many pages you can read on any given day. In fact, I would even say purposefully underread, purposefully underperform on a daily basis, but still ensure that part of your life, you've hit the goal, you've checked the box. You can just even read 2 pages, because trust me, over time, as you develop the habit of reading on a daily basis, those page counts will increase. Those page counts will kind of snowball into something substantial over time. So I wouldn't worry about reading too little on a daily basis. And last of all, the last pointer is that you need to follow your curiosity, because there's a stupid tendency for us to pursue what looks glamorous, to pursue what everyone else is reading, and to kind of read a book and think to yourself, I don't really like this. And, to kind of emulate my own reading program. Like I said, this is just for your reference and for your entertainment only, my reading program. So don't just blindly follow whatever I do, and don't just adopt a random routine because it makes sense for another person. A part of figuring out what works for you is all about trying out different routines and trying out different systems to see which one sticks for you. And I'm going to make a separate video about this in the future as well, which is on note-taking or annotating from books. I've recently started a really think deeply on this topic, and I realized that note-taking shouldn't follow any sets of structures, because note-taking is this rearticulation of what you think of the book, and those thoughts are so personal that no process and no gimmick can really capture that note-taking process. So dedicated note-taking process coming up for you. But the point here is find out your why, figure out what works for you, and deliberately underread. Because a lot of the times consistency matters a lot more compared to reading 20 or setting up an arbitrary page count. So that's why I favor keeping time instead of keeping page counts. So anyway, I think that's all I have to cover in this video. Again, this is another format of this unfiltered approach to sharing insights with you guys. I think sometimes I tend to go down rabbit holes, so I will improve. I will cut down those rabbit hole segments in the future, but nevertheless, hope you guys have enjoyed this segment, and I will see you in the next video. Take care, and goodbye.